Hi. So it's real-time working group, 12th of August 2020. We have a couple of announcements just quickly. So the progress on the group is going to be announced on the group call today. So that's why I have a few items in the agenda just to kind of clear up where we're at on a couple of things. Um, yeah, I've also issued an MR to the working group page to that end so that we can tick off anything that we've done in the meantime. We're nearly there with regards to phase one. I think we just have to get quality involved, and we're pretty much through all our exit criterion for the first phase. And then, yeah, just a quick update. From what I can see on the Kubernetes side, we seem to be about 50% of the way to having WebSockets deployed through Kubernetes. I would allow for additional items to come into that. There's been a couple already. And then remember, I think as well that this is WebSockets for the web terminal and not for Action Cable, although I've seen some of the items in the Epic seem to be to do with Action Cable, so I'm not sure. Yeah, so I don't have great visibility over that at the minute. Like, that's just as far as I can see. They're about halfway there, so it seems to be on track. Any other announcements or anything? No. Cool. Okay, I have the first item. We had discussed, or Heinrich had suggested at the end of the last meeting that we look at possibly doing the rest of the sidebar while we're not waiting, but, concurrent to deploying to .com. So I identified like 3 parts of the sidebar that I think would be relatively easy to do. Subscribing to an issue, locking the discussion, adding a weight. I think these are all already done in GraphQL mutations on the back end and queries. So any other thoughts on that? Like whether we want to press ahead with this? Do we want to create issues for those items and delegate them out?
I think Gabe raised a concern, right? Like the next point. And yeah, so I just wanted to talk briefly about like the comment I posted there. So basically the main reason I didn't go with GraphQL subscriptions at first was that this feature didn't exist, this broadcast feature that I just read about, which Gabe linked. It's actually new, like 2 months ago released. So without that feature, what GraphQL subscriptions actually did was like similar to what we did, where every subscriber, the server would like re-execute the GraphQL like subscription or the query within the subscriptions. It's like doing the query 10 times anyway, and like it's better to do this on the API nodes, which are like kind of like already running and stuff through a separate request versus like stressing out our new Action Cable nodes, right? So that was the initial like decision. But yeah, now that I read about these broadcasting, then it makes it a bit more like feasible. And so there's actually a way to like query it once, and then on the GraphQL side, you just define which fields are broadcastable and which are not. The docs do say that it only does a broadcast if all the fields requested are broadcastable. So we probably want the issue updated event to only have broadcastable fields or something like that. And then the other fields, like the other parts where the sidebar that are user specific, like the to-do or the subscription, could be like a separate subscription, like a separate event, right? So that we don't mix these fields and lose the optimization. So yeah, it is possible, but the good thing, or one thing I'd like to raise about this is it's actually related to how to the other point about adding extra fields, because adding extra fields, I think, actually makes this easier to shift to GraphQL subscriptions, just because of how we do it on the front end. So I don't think the front end changed, but the last time I looked at it, this is how it worked. Currently, it's actually the assignees component that does the Action Cable subscription. It subscribes to the issue updated event, and then makes a query once it receives an event to the API, a GraphQL query, and then updates the data, right? And so for it to work on the other fields, we'd have to move this subscription part somewhere outside, right? Like on the sidebar or like on the main issue page or somewhere, so that we subscribe to the event there, make the query for like multiple fields, and then propagate these the result to the individual components, right? And yeah, I think that's the main work to be done, is mostly front end thing. So once that's done, we could easily change to GraphQL subscriptions, because we're now like subscribing at the higher level, right, at the top level. And instead of subscribing to an action cable socket, it would be like a change it to a GraphQL subscription. And then instead of making a query, a GraphQL query when we receive an event, we don't need to do anything, because we just receive what we already have, which is like a GraphQL result, which is going to be pretty similar on the front end, I guess. So yeah, so I think it's mostly a front end thing, and doing the extra fields actually helps us. Like, it's kind of a weird thing, like we don't want to add extra fields because, you know, but yeah.
Yeah, that's why I brought up that comment is when I've done this previously on the front end, like first off, I noticed in the front end work that we did, we put a lot of conditional logic for like, if if WebSockets is enabled, use this component instead of this other component, and handle the network request this way instead of that way. And all it was encouraging us to do is, like, before or as we scale this out, like make it more like, remove the logic from the individual components, because it doesn't need to be there about what network connection we're using, because you can put it in the Apollo like client configuration. So basically you can say, like, if WebSockets is enabled there, use this transport protocol, otherwise use this other one. That's how I did it before. So there's no like conditional logic in the components themselves. The Apollo client handles the fallback to which network transport protocol you want to use, which makes it a lot easier in working on the individual components, because they don't care where the data comes from. They just get it. I think the only thing we'd have to do on the back end is, I do know that there's the query and mutation base types, but then there's also the subscription base type. So that's the only downside, is we'd have to add the subscription base type, I believe, to the back end GraphQL schema for the subscriptions to work well with Apollo, or like out of the box, so there's nothing needs to happen. And I guess I was just encouraging that, because we're kind of blazing the trail and setting standards, and I think once we get a few more fields in, there's lots of other folks that are going to start copying the patterns that we establish. And I didn't want to get to the point where we start scaling this up and then everyone uses the pattern that we established. It may not be the optimal one, and then it takes a year for us to refactor everything, which when you have lots of different teams working on different things, it will naturally take a long time. So I'm not like, I trust the engineers to pick the right pattern, but as we scale out to more fields, let's refactor to make sure that it's the ideal solution and the ideal pattern for other teams to follow. That's all.
Yeah, actually on the back end, I already have an MR for GraphQL subscriptions, because back then I actually created 2 MR. So we actually got this working with GraphQL subscriptions, like adding a subscription type to our base schema, and then adding the Apollo thing so that it handles WebSocket connections to action cable sockets. And yeah, the only reason I didn't do it was, like I mentioned above, like it's the same thing. It does the same thing, but now it doesn't, right? So on the back end, there's actually very little work if we wanted to switch. But my main concern is really the design on the front end, where the query is right now on the assignees, which is kind of weird. I raised this during the MR, but I think the decision was to like move it out when we need to or something. I didn't really follow it, but yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think let's I don't know who the GRI for the front end is going to be, but we can, if it's going to be Scott again or whoever, we'll figure that out and we can work with them to set up. But I think moving the logic of transporting to the Apollo client configuration and initialization is the next, like, a good next step. And then whatever pattern it is, like, are we going to subscribe to like an issue channel, or that would make the most logical sense in the long run, just because it then would allow us to, in the future, move the soft real-time poll that we run right now over to the WebSockets as well. I think that we use for notes in the description. So Yeah, let's spin up issues and keep going. And I think as soon as we get something on .com, we should pause and run a bunch of benchmarks and make sure performance is okay for like going further. That's my opinion, but happy to be overridden.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
So looking at our velocity thus far, we probably can do one or the other. Like we can probably implement some more features, or we can focus on the front end work to move to subscriptions and the back end work you mentioned, Heinrich, but probably not both. So considering that the Kubernetes work might be completed in 13.4 at the end of 13.4, I agreed then we probably need some issues to focus on the front end work, and we need a DRI for that as well. And we'll focus on that.
That sounds good to me. I can work on the issues. I'm getting dinner right now and foraging, but as soon as I'm back in my office, I'll spin up some issues. And I think the next field that would make the most sense that I know customers have had a negative experience is the labels. And I think the other thing worth considering is because things are a little bit more going to be more real time, the UX should probably change a little bit. Like what happens if somebody's picking a label and we get an update that same label has been applied. This is like one of the problems that folks run into is they try to apply a label and then somebody else applies it or removes it at the same time they're trying to edit the labels. And so what does the UX around that look like? So we might also want somebody from UX to help handle this, like the race conditions or what it would be the behavior if somebody had a label picker open and that label got updated from another client at the same time.
Yeah, it might actually solve some existing UX problems. Like for example, if I assign a label using a quick action and then I assign another label using the label widget in the sidebar without refreshing the page, it will overwrite my original quick action, probably without me knowing, so it won't show that state anyway. So it might actually solve that UX problem.
Yeah, so basically our real-time thing actually solves part of the problem, but there is still a small UX issue with where it happens when the drop-down is open, right? Where the user is currently opening it. So, I mean, the window is smaller, but it's still a problem. It's the same thing with assignees actually, because like there's also multiple assignees and they're updated the same way where we send a list of IDs to the back end so that whatever list you currently have on your front end is actually what we send, and then it overwrites whatever's on the back end if somebody changed it.
So if that happens when the assignee gets updated and I have my list open, it won't show up on the list as that assignee being checked, or?
I don't know what happens right now. I didn't check the front end, but yeah.
We'll play around with it. I mean, this is all like greenfield stuff, so I'm not expecting there not to be hiccups. I just, I guess.
Yeah, but just the thing I wanted to add is like, at least we're not making things worse, right? I mean, we're actually making the situation better. There's just, it's still not perfect though. There's still some cases we need to cover.
Cool. Yeah, I'm excited about this. Y'all doing amazing work, and I'm very thankful and giddy is the way I would say it.
Awesome. Cool. Does that address your next comment as well, Gabe, in the agenda? It seemed to be to talk about scalability and implementation details.
No, I think that's it. Like that's what I was going to cover. It's mostly like front end stuff that I know should probably happen, but I'm not an engineer. But I just wanted to talk through like patterns, and we did that, so I'm good.
Okay, cool. Sounds like we've a takeaway there to create the issues for the next step with subscriptions of the front end. So cool. Yeah, next item then is mine as well. So I started the work for Cloud Native GitLab to enable an action cable, enable configuration of action cable automatically in embedded mode. But it's still very much a work in progress. So I had some trouble with it locally, some versions out of sync or something between the version of the protocol the front end is using and the version that's provided by the back end. And I think it's like, I haven't quite got to the bottom of it, but it's something to do with how it's set up. It's not something to do with the work we've done thus far. But Jason's asking if we can provide any CPU or memory measurements. And given that this is on dev.gitlab.org, I was wondering, are we tracking anything already? Like, is there any information we can provide back to them about how much more memory this is going to use, or how much more CPU?
Maybe that's one for Ben. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we publish anything into Prometheus from dev. Is that correct? So I'm not sure we have
from dev GitLab.org. We should. We had a Prometheus server running next to dev GitLab.org. I turned that down last week. We should have some metrics available. Actually, I think there is. I need to go double check, but I think there is a local Prometheus server running on dev GitLab.org, so that it is tracking its own data.
Right, the embedded one, right?
Yeah, there should be an embedded one. I haven't looked at it in a long time. Let me quick check.
The other thing though is like the resource implications are actually very like traffic dependent, I guess, right? So it's kind of not very useful, I guess.
Yeah, it's not enough load for anybody to notice. Ops GitLab Net might be a better candidate because it does get a bit more traffic.
Yeah, I think we
it's
might
more
need
like mission critical though. Like I don't know how the appetite for experimental features on that instance is. But...
As long as we can turn it on and off quickly, we don't depend on Ops GitLab Net for anything like critical path, but it would make people cranky because if deploys stopped working.
It also runs ChatOps, right? Which is used a lot, I guess, to interface with the feature toggles and all that.
Do people use issues on ops or mostly pipelines and Mars things?
Mostly pipelines.
Yeah, because it only affects issues. So.
Yeah, we mostly avoid running issues there. Yeah, so less useful.
Is traffic really that important for measuring memory utilization, like the extra headroom required just to run action cable? Because whether it gets traffic or not, we still have to run action cable embedded.
Yeah, I mean, what you mean by run is we actually just mount an engine, and I think Matthias already like checked it sometime, and like there wasn't really any significant like memory rise, right, or something.
Yeah, it looked pretty small. That was on a dev machine, which should not make a big difference. I mean, so maybe this all kind of depends on what happens down the stack, right? But especially with Ruby, you have this problem where like the longer you run a piece of code, as it allocates memory, it might have a longer term effect on the memory profile. It looks like it's a pretty lightweight thing, so I wouldn't expect that to be. And probably dev GitLab org is probably not a good platform to measure that anyway. So that's probably something that we will only really see in production when it gets like real user traffic. Yeah, outside of that, I'm kind of stumped. I don't know how else we would look at this. Prometheus would definitely be a reliable source for this. You would also have to, like, the thing is also you want to compare it against some kind of baseline, right? So you want to see kind of what is the incremental amount of extra memory that we would consume, or CPU even. It's not even just memory, right, that we're talking about.
Yeah, so I'm wondering what the CNG project is actually used for. I mean, if it's used for sort of ephemeral instances that are kind of, spun up and spun down, then the length of time really doesn't matter, because it's, and the utilization doesn't really matter. Like if we're expecting a lot of traffic to affect, it's really just I think that they would want to know what the overhead simply of running the additional action cable server or embedded action cable would be,
I expect it to be quite small because it's essentially just another gem that we load, and it's not a very large one. at that. So it's not like it's dragging a whole boatload of transitive dependencies in with it that would leave a large footprint. So I'm not too concerned about it.
Okay, cool. Thanks. I'll leave an update on the MR and maybe copy in if that's okay.
I had a question just out of curiosity. In the CNG project, so we provide a Docker Compose setup, which is really interesting. So I'm just wondering what, maybe this is not the right platform to discuss this, but if anyone has any ideas, how does this compare to projects like the GCK, where because some developers use Docker Compose already to work on GitLab as developers, how does this compare to using, like spinning up all these containers using the compose file in CNG? Is that, like, what are the, is that something that we're moving towards? Like, is that something that the GCK team should know about? Because it's quite similar in like what it accomplishes, right?
Yeah, I think Camille is aware of CNG, and it was like mentioned, I forgot the specifics, but like some differences on regarding development or something. But yeah, I forgot that. Yeah, I think, yeah, you could ask Camille. I think he knows more. But
yeah, okay. Well, no, I'm for sure. I mean, there's a lot of like development specific tooling in GCK as well. And just looking at this, the main difference as well is that the GCK uses only one base image from which, like, all the containers actually use the same image. And it just like mounts different source folders to then run different components in different containers. So that's quite different from what CNG does. But yeah, okay, I can catch up with Camilla on it.
I think the purpose of the CNG project, it's like those images will eventually be deployed using Kubernetes when we have it in production. And then Docker Compose isn't that relevant, only for testing the images locally, I guess, and spinning up a local.
Right, but I think that's great, because I think it would be amazing if we had a test environment that is a little closer to production, because the GCK also makes a number of assumptions right now. So it's not quite, so it pretends to run all these different services on different hosts locally, but yeah, it's not really representative of what it would actually look like if it was deployed to something like Kubernetes.
It's not really relevant, but I actually use CNG locally when I'm testing bugs and triaging bugs, just because I find it easier to, force recreate once and then just bring it down and spin it back up for quick testing, whereas GDK can sometimes take a long time to boot up.
Yeah, completely. That's why I use GCK as well. I find it quite convenient to just be able to blow away a container if it should break and then start fresh.
Okay, cool. We're coming up against time. So last item, Matthias, you left a comment in the track action cable settings and usage ping. This might be one for Gabe as well. Now, we have gone to dev.gitlab.org without usage ping, or, well, that's not really relevant. We've released it to single instance small customers without usage ping already. So I guess maybe Gabe could speak to like how high a priority this is, and then we'll have to think of like a creative solution for how we can track this, because we can't do it using the usual way we would.
Yeah, sorry by the way for bringing this up so late, because when I first looked at this, it would be very straightforward if it was just a settings key like anything else. But then, and I think also we switched to an environment variable. That was not the first approach I think we took. So I think I just got my wires crossed, and I thought, oh, that's easy to do. But then, yeah, like if it's just an environment variable that only exists for a particular environment or service that we run, then this will not work with usage ping, because it always runs in a scikit job.
That's a good question. I think it's worthwhile to track if we can figure out how to do it. I wasn't planning on, I guess I didn't really realize we were this far along, but I wasn't planning on doing a release post block for 13.3. I'm happy to spin one up today if we want to do that, and like just basically say, single instance self-managed users can use WebSockets now. or we can figure out how to track it, and then we can do like a bigger release, maybe in a release post block in 13.4. I wouldn't say it's the highest priority, like drop more important work and do it, but it is worthwhile to test and to measure, because I think that will sort of inform how well we do at like evangelizing the feature and how to use it well and documenting it and making it visible to the wider community, but then also like how much to invest in it over the long run.
So just to because we can get creative, right? It's just the question is like if this was filed under 13.3, which is that gives us only a few days, right? I think because Monday, I think we should look probably to freeze. So there are ways we could probably detect this. I wonder if we could do something like because we should be publishing. Actually, would we have any Prometheus metrics that would indicate that? Yeah, I don't think so, right? Because it's not, if it runs embedded, we don't have anything in Prometheus we could look at to find out if there is a action cable. Yeah, if action cable is running on a.
Yeah,
Because that could have been an option.
If we can't get it via usage ping, I know that we're all trying to standardize on getting our usage data from the usage ping instead of stitching a bunch of other sources together, so it's easier for less technical folks to build self-service data analysis. So I don't know how you would get it included in usage ping. That would be the ideal.
Yeah, Prometheus is the only source I can think of, but I don't know. Do you know, Heinrich, if we would have anything, if you run embedded action cable, would there be any metrics in Prometheus that we could look at to then conclude, okay, action cable is actually enabled on that node?
I created an issue for adding the Prometheus metric for a number of
Okay.
like things, number of connections, I think. But yeah, we haven't worked on it, so.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a very implicit way as well of deriving it, but it would be a good indicator, right? So that we wouldn't actually look at the configuration, but more at the outcome of having it enabled. It would be definitely a workaround.
So you're saying the usage ping worker like connects to Prometheus and gets the
yeah, we do
number?
that anyway, because we already do that to
Okay.
collect all sorts of things about self-managed nodes. So that exists as like infrastructure that we could piggyback this on. But yeah, it's not ideal. I mean, the best solution really would be to have a settings key, but we ran into these, I think we ran into these problems with the initializer cyclic dependencies and all that stuff where, yeah, you remember that, Henry, right? So that's why we actually ended up going for an end variable. So apparently there's a lot of risk in putting that into the config or no clear way forward to do that.
Yeah, I guess the Prometheus thing is a good idea. It's just that I guess we can't get it into 13.3 because, and yeah, it also hits two birds in one stone because we're gonna do that anyway. We wanted to track number of connections connecting to action cable. So
yeah, good point. Yeah.
If we want
so
to,
let's not.
sorry.
I was gonna say let's not rush it. I mean, if Prometheus is the right way to do it, and I don't like rushing at the last minute before the freeze. So it's fine if we do it in 13 usage ping. Do we still want to have a release post entry for the single instance being able to use WebSockets?
I think we could like postpone it to when we get usage ping and when maybe we could get extra fields, right? We discussed this last week and last meeting, and I felt it's kind of, bad, or like it sounds bad when we like release a feature, just, with very small feature, like only for assignees, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I felt like that when for the first year at GitLab, and now I'm like, I don't care. It's a win. So, but I do think it's fine. Do we have, and I can check on this later, we're at time, but just like before we do that, we need to make sure we have really good documentation, and I haven't looked at our docs for this yet, so that folks know how to enable it, disable it, all that good stuff. I'll take a look at that when I get back to my computer later today, and we can kind of decide. I'll post an async in the working group Slack channel and get y'all's opinion on whether or not you want to include it. If you do, I'll spin up a release post entry today, or we can do it 13.4 when we have the usage ping. I'm fine either way.
I'd be fine with 13.4 because we still have part of our exit criteria is to have quality look at this and see if there are any things they'd like to add, you know, before we kind of make a big announcement or anything about it. So I'm okay personally with putting it off to 13.4.
All right, sounds good.
Cool. We're at time, so I'll stop the recording. Thanks everyone for coming. Thanks for your time, especially those of you who got up super early or stayed really late. So thanks very much.
Thanks, bye.